Thank you, Jeff. As you know, Jeff is responsible in many ways for putting together the schedule, but sometimes life brings adjustments. Amanda was supposed to preach on the book of Micah, and Micah 6:8, and what the God is asking of you. When we realized that she wouldn't be able to come today, she asked if she could still preach on Micah, so that would not take Micah from her. I said, let's not waste a beautiful sermon, I'm sure. So things change, and for some reason we have Zechariah, and I think I know why. I think it's not a coincidence that today is the day where our church on the entire continent of North America, or here in Canada, is praying about racial reconciliation. I think what we need right now, not the opinions or philosophical constructs, I think we need something that Zechariah just hits right on the nail there. As we getting ready to hear his text, I want to share a little bit of experience, and I think the setting that is very similar to in which Zechariah is speaking. Zechariah is inviting or describing what is happening in the courtroom. I can just see how somebody or bailiff or somebody comes and says, "All rise." Or even when the judge walks in, those of you who've been in a courtroom, even nobody says "all rise." When the judge walks in, everyone is just kind of on her feet, on his feet, standing. All rise. 6 years ago, a little early in the spring, I had an opportunity to hear those words. I had to go to court, and for completely different reasons. I drove for about 2 hours downtown Los Angeles to Los Angeles Convention Center, right across from Staples, downtown, confusing, everything is moving. And I walked in, there were 3,372 people standing in line to get to the courthouse. But it didn't look like a courthouse, it was a Los Angeles Convention Center. It was a swearing ceremony. Swearing, not like in cursing. I always have a time, is it pronounced the same? But swearing, yeah, it's not different kind of swearing. I'm sure maybe today would be different kind of convention there. But people were actually excited. A lot of people dressed up because we were taking an oath to become citizens of the United States. So we walked in, 3,372 people had to appear before the judge. The huge convention center was to become a courtroom, but it wasn't. Everyone was on the phone, drinking, talking, taking selfies. Some people were just eating a sandwich. Some people were excited, just sitting. Some people waited for the longest time. Some people didn't even care. And it was just a mess of chaos of people. I mean, imagine over 3,000 people, the huge convention center, and nothing was sort of, and the only way you organize their chairs, and there's a line that you're not supposed to cross. Everyone was searched, and we were just hanging out there. How this place can become a courtroom? Until the moment a figure in the black robe started moving across. We were waiting for him for the longest time. He was moving across, and as he was making his way to his chair in the center to preside at the table, you can see how the entire room just start quieting down. And when he stood at his chair, getting ready to begin, you can hear people breathing in the room over the air conditioning. All rise. And the place was transformed in something very different. Zechariah chapter 2, verses 13 through chapter 3, verses 5. Be silent, everyone, in the Lord's presence because he has moved from his holy habitation. Then the Lord showed me the high priest Joshua standing before the messenger from the Lord, and the adversary was standing by his right side to accuse him. And the Lord said to the adversary, "The Lord rebukes you, adversary. The Lord, the one choosing Jerusalem, rebukes you. Is this one not a log snatched from the fire?" Joshua was wearing filthy clothes and standing before the messenger. He responded to the standing before him, "Take off his filthy clothes." And he said to Joshua, "Look, I have removed your guilt from you. Put on priestly robes." He said, "Put a clean turban upon his head." So they put the clean turban upon his head, and they dressed him in garments, white as the Lord's messenger stood by. A judge's bench, or maybe even chambers, is where Zechariah is inviting us today. The whole universe, the entire space seems to be converted into a gigantic courtroom. And as we watch, Zechariah opens the microphone, turns on the camera, and he starts live streaming. Facebook, YouTube, anywhere. It is live streamed through the universe. We have live streaming from the courtroom where it is happening. And think the moment is so special that I can hear everyone there breathing. This is the courtroom, and it's like Zechariah is trying to help us to feel the atmosphere, what is happening, because this is not your average gathering. This is not even your average court day, because at that moment, Zechariah invites us to probably one of the greatest trials of all times. Joshua, a priest, is a defendant. And he's there facing the judge and the accuser. And I can just see the accuser, smug face, spewing hatred, spewing sarcasm. This is what the accuser is supposed to do. Accuser and the judge next to each other. So different, but somehow in that room, it doesn't help to realize that this is not going to end the way favorably for Joshua, high priest. This is the story of Job. We get to observe a fascinating scene. Something is happening between the defender, the accuser, and the judge. I can hear them breathing, particularly Joshua. Imagine for a second being in Joshua's place, talking about pulling a short end of the stick. What are the like might be? Of all the people that ever lived, he has to be on this trial. Not only he has to be on this trial, he is now being presented, or the trial itself is being live streamed, not only through entire universe, but through the ages and time that we living so much later, we living 2,500 years later, we can still see the trial. You know you're in trouble. This is not like going to the principal's office, right, Bernie? You have people standing there, or being called to your boss, that you have to face the trial. And what is going to Joshua's mind, I can't even imagine. What's going to happen to him? He knows the accuser is not there to joke around. And the accuser's job, as we watch enough television about courtrooms and been lately, accuser's job is only one job, and one job only, is to do what? Is to get you convicted. And Joshua is just a human being, and the judge there is the righteous person. So he is in between the rock and a hard place. Imagine, the accuser is after you with everything, with all the evil things that the accuser can do and say in order to convict you, and the judge is a righteous, holy, that even a minor misstep in the light of the holy really comes out and sticks out as a great offense. How can you win in this situation? You're doomed. I wonder, is that what Joshua is thinking? And Joshua is just a high priest. He did his best, tried to serve people, and now he has to take a stand, and he has to defend himself. I wonder if he's even breathing at that time. Zechariah does not tell us what exactly Joshua is thinking inwardly, but the outward description of Joshua is rather telling. Joshua is standing there in filthy clothes, in the dirty. And not just a little stain there, like sometimes you go in a restaurant and you put a napkin not to stain your shirt. No, this is just, if I use the original language, because some of the translations Jeff and I would try to put in for scripture there, and we decided not to use that translation. If you want to know which one it is, I'll let you know after church. Now you'll be thinking, I can't wait until the sermon is over to find out. But the word used, the original language, it's really stained. I mean, it's really dirty, and is as dirty as you can imagine in the mind of the ancient person. He's standing stained in soiled clothes there because he realizes he has nothing to offer. This is the courtroom. Why Joshua? What is the significance of him being a priest? He's the anointed person who's chosen to serve people. He's the special chosen person. He's called out among everyone to become the servant of people. I wonder if he's the embodiment, a metaphor of the spiritual community of Israel. Because it was Israel's mission to be the light to the world, to present people the true God, to present the principles of the kingdom where people are treated as human beings created by the Creator God. Not out of spite, not in a war, but out of love. That's the story of creation in the Hebrew Bible, which was very different from any other story of creation around Israel. Israel meant to be that light, that beam of hope for the world. I wonder if Joshua can be a metaphor and embodiment, not only the Israel of the past, but Israel of the present, the church. What if it's not Joshua? What is it? Maybe it is us. You see what's happening here? The accuser is not merely trying to accuse breathless Joshua there. Joshua is just a person, a small fish. The Satan, foaming at his mouth, screams accusations against God. And all of a sudden I realize the courtroom that we're observing has to do a lot more with Joshua, even Israel 2,600 years ago. That courtroom is still open and is still live streaming because it is not Joshua, but it is those who are chosen by God to present him as standing there. It is Christ's church. And I hold my breath now. How did that happen? How did our reputation as the body of Christ, as the church, became so soiled? You know what I'm talking about. You know, one of the things that people say about church and why they no longer come to church: hypocrisy, false piety, false humility, egotism, elitism, sense of being special, exclusive. Phrases like that became kind of, in particularly when I came to church, I know it was a different country in a different time. It feels like forever ago. But one of the first things that I started hearing to church, and I don't know, maybe your experience was different, especially those who started coming to church at our Riverside community, because our legacy was precisely to change that mentality. But I heard things that Adventist Church, Seventh Adventist Church, is the only true church on the planet. And you have to go back to it. You're the only true church. There's those who even go further and say the Christian church is Christians are the only people who will make it to heaven. So these kinds of things When people outside hear it, they try to understand and they see us. They don't know what we are thinking. Nobody knows except us. But when they see us, they see this hypocrisy and egotism and elitism. They see it as a really filthy clothes. So it is not Joshua, it is our church, Christ Church. It is not a poor priest who found himself in unfortunate circumstances between the rock and the hard place. It is me. It is I standing there and facing the reality. I don't have to worry about anybody else. I become to worry about what is important to me. I started to worry about how it is good to me. I once heard a story, and it kind of shocked me. One of the first experiences I had with people who grew up in the sort of Seventh-day Adventist culture, and I don't think they even realize that. And if I tell my friend right now that this is what happened, he'll probably be petrified. So what we're talking about, and I, as a person who started coming to church, we start talking about keeping Sabbath. And you're not supposed to do these things, and it's hard for me to imagine, but you've heard of it, or you've experienced it, that people who had to work on Sabbath, when I came to church in 91 in church, it was not an option. You can't just go to church and work on Sabbath. And I had the questions that everyone would ask. So if nobody works on Sabbath, who is doing electricity for us? Who is providing transportation for us? Another issue we had, particularly in my hometown, which is a seaport for merchant marines. This is the situation. You're on the boat. There's a crew, about 30, 40 people on the boat. And if you're a Seventh-day Adventist, what do you do on Sabbath? Alex? No, yeah, so what do you do on Sabbath? Well, there's no church. You're in the middle of the ocean. So what do you do on Sabbath? What would be a logical thing to do? You're not supposed to work. Go to, yeah, but who's supposed to, who's riding the ship? So somebody has to do it instead of you, right? But the commandment said, not you, nor your slave, nor your donkey is supposed to work for you. And what if the entire crew, you were so good of an Adventist, and you just baptized the entire crew in the ocean right there? What happens? We're not thinking these categories because we're standing, and our filthy clothes became that arrogance that we are better than somebody else. And we somehow take it as our banner, as our pride. I'm so proud of my church that today we have a prayer of confession. It is more important than just the issue of a social justice. It's a deeply theological issue for us as the church, because our church have not been good to confessing and saying we were wrong. We always try to be pridefully defend our position in the right place. Having studied Adventist history a little bit, it's amazing that in many ways our church has been wrong. But in so many ways, in so many times, our church did remarkable thing. The founders of our church, Joseph Bates, one of the founders, was one of the original abolitionists of the movement. Adventist church and abolitionist movement started with the same people, basically sharing the same vision and passion for the kingdom of God. It is the message to the South. Ellen White writes a remarkable book about the mission to the colored people in the South. Ellen White's son, Edson White, builds a boat called Morning Star. And they ride the boat from Michigan all the way down to Mississippi because they can now use the boat to educate black children, because you're not allowed to do that on the ground. But on the boat, the laws of the land don't apply, so they could do it on the boat. Our church did remarkable, truly progressive things in the issue of racial reconciliation, but there were moments when the vice president of General Conference in the 30s could not eat in the same cafeteria with a white people. That one of the heads of the church, because he was black, could not share a meal with his white counterparts. This is all our church. It is the story of Lucy Bird, is 1945, who was African American nurse, Adventist nurse. She was not allowed, when she got sick, she was not admitted to the hospital, Adventist hospital, because they would only admit white people. And she died on the way to another hospital. This is also part of our church. We have to confess things. We have to say it as it is. And I'm so glad that the message Zechariah is not the message of arrogance. It's a deeply spiritual thing to do, to confess. And once in a while, it's okay to say, I've been wrong. It's okay to say, I've been wrong to your spouse, to your friend, to your children, to your parents. It's okay to say it. In fact, more often we do this, more deeper we realize that when the time comes to stand between the accuser and the judge, nothing we can do for the judge to know more or less about us. But we can do something about standing there proclaiming and pointing that judge accepts us as we are. Because what's happening is truly remarkable. There he's standing. It's not Joshua anymore. It is me standing there in that courtroom. Whatever is wrong around me, my community, my church, my country, my world, it is not longer they are wrong. It is me who is standing in the filthy clothes. All of us. Isaiah has this famous line in chapter 64, verse 6. We have all become like the unclean. All our righteous deeds like filthy clothes. But we removed confession booths from our churches. There's no confession booth in there. And somehow we installed the photo booth in the churches, and we prefer to have a photo booth in the church and take a selfie or to check in the church rather than go into confessional. And maybe the Zechariah's message reminds us that how important is to confess, to admit, and to know that making confession individually and as a community helps us to stand in front of the accuser and the judge and to know who we are and what we're about. I don't know what Joshua is thinking during this trial of his life, but the atmosphere is so tense that we can hear his breathing, his heartbeat, and then maybe even his heart is skipping the beat because he is about to hear the sentence. You don't show up in court. Those of you who've been to court, you know, and I've heard once actually a lawyer advising her client to go and buy a suit in order to go to court because you need to present it your best. You don't go to court looking like Joshua in filthy rags because the judge might find it offensive. To admit that's all you got, your righteousness is this. We think it's offensive to the judge. And the sentence is about to come out. And I don't know if they ask anybody to rise again as they expect the sentence. And as they all stand, the accuser is there so happy because Joshua, he didn't even have to do much. Look at this filthy priest. Look at this community. Look at Israel, what they have done. Look at us, where are we at and what we have done. The accuser's job is done. And now the judge is about to announce his sentence. Are you ready for it? Bring the royal clothes and make sure put something on his head. And let's make it a turban. Now, Joshua, I don't know how you feel comfortable or not. I almost wish I can order somewhere like Oriental Trading Post to order a turban for everybody today. Because this is like the coolest thing ever. Joshua, and I don't know why Zechariah mentions specifically the turban. I'm thinking it has something to do that the turban was the uniform of an anointed one, of a priest or a king. Now he becomes the royalty. The sentence that they expected going to end his life opens up a new possibility, transforming, changes his status. This is altogether different. It's a new day. I don't know, something about that courtroom decision that changes the reality. Nothing really happened, but when I stood there at the Los Angeles Convention Center, when we had this gigantic American flag in front of us, and we all raised our hands, and we all pledged allegiance to the United States, and we all were pronounced as citizens, something happened. I was a different person. I mean, there are very specific selfish benefits right now because I can go pretty much in every country in the world, and all I need to do is to show my passport. Most of the countries, I mean, not today. After it's all over, I can go. Have you ever traveled, some of you who were not always American citizens, have you ever tried to travel abroad with non-American passport? It's hard for me even describe what you have to go through and how and what we've been through prior, because it took us, so we received it in 2014, it took us almost 15 years to receive our green cards. But before that, they're traveling every single time. I remember sitting once in the American embassy in Kiev for 4 hours waiting for an interview with the portrait of a Yugoslavian dictator behind us and a price tag on his head. It was like $1 million if you catch Milosevic. Imagine sitting for 4 hours staring at the Milosevic face and thinking, what can I do with $1 million? But then it's like, where am I going to find Milosevic? I don't even know if I am ever going to be able to leave Ukraine because I don't have what it takes. But this new status that Joshua now has, that opens up, and remember, he's the embodiment, he's the metaphor for the church. Joshua now opens it up for us. And Joshua says, you looking kind of funny with that turban on, with the royal clothes on. This is the judge, and this is how grace sneaks in. This is the before we left Los Angeles Convention Center, the judge said, but I have to tell you a story. All of you, 3,372 just became his citizens. But I have to tell you, I am a child of an immigrant. My mom came to this country from Odessa, Ukraine. Odessa, Ukraine happened to be my hometown. The connection, I'm looking at someone who's standing there and saying, there's something more that's happening here. This is not just a room or a big room. This is the human lives that interconnected. And somehow above it all, there is the judge who is not looking at the way I dressed. There's the judge who doesn't look the way I speak. There's the judge does not look the way I eat, I smell, doesn't look the way my skin color is, my eye color is, either I have or don't have hair. That judge does not look at that. There's something more is happening because the big picture, and we become the big picture of that courtroom in which grace reigns and rises above all. And there is nothing the accuser, with all the evil and filth that the accuser can do against grace. Grace is not about throwing away the rules, but it is when kindness, forgiveness, compassion overshadows the rules. Grace is unexpected and unmerited gift. And it's not the kind of gift that make a recipient uncomfortable. Grace is when the judge says, my mom came from the same town you came. She was an immigrant. And as if that judge stepped down from the high place where judges usually are, stepped down and stood among us. Grace is when the judge takes the stand with the defendants. And all of a sudden you realize that this is not just a nice thought or idea. This is a deeply theological, I used that word a few times today. This is who our God is. God does not want us to know anything about Him. God does not want us to know that God comes and becomes one of us. And this is what Jesus did when He became one of us. And when the judge stands and judge dresses poor Joshua in the same clothes he's wearing, we realize that grace is essentially equality when the holiness becomes available to all. No matter what kind of clothes you came in, you get to put on a royal dress and a funny turban. And if that is not enough, Zechariah in chapter 4 takes us from a courtroom into the temple. Now he's standing between the olive branches and the almond trees there. There's the lampstand behind him. Not only God forgave the past, but He changes the present. The temple is being restored. This is the Israel returning back from captivity from Babylon, and the real that was as social distancing as you can imagine. If somebody takes you, yanks you out of your house and kicks you all the way to Babylon and not allowing you to speak your language or go to your church. Coming out of this, they see not only they were giving back their status, not only they considered their God now become one of them. God comes into their midst again. And His presence and the sense of His presence are being restored. And people in their response, and this is probably one of my most favorite texts in the entire Scripture, Zechariah chapter 4, verse 7. What are you, a great mountain? Before Zerubbabel you shall become a plain, and he shall bring out of the top stone amid the shouts. Grace to it, grace to it. The word grace that often associated with the New Testament was deeply rooted in everything that's happening in the history of Israel. No matter how low they were, no matter what kind of crisis they were in, no matter what kind of certain circumstances they were found, grace to it, grace to it. And that is why I think Christianity stood and survived, because it was able to restore that sense of grace amidst even the pagan world and the dominance of the Roman Empire. Grace is maybe something that is missing today. As we watch the news, as we hear the exchange of opinions, as we hear the politicians going at each other, as we exchange the conversations with the friends and family, as we try to raise our children, as we try to figure out what the church is going to look, what if we start using grace like we're using salt, or just start putting a little bit of grace in everything and see how life is going to taste different if we add a little bit just to it. I wonder if John, who sent us the revelation, opened up for us the same glimpse. I wonder if he saw the same temple, because in the beginning of the book of Revelation, John portrays Jesus, a high priest, whose name is also Joshua, by the way. He stands there in the temple. And again, this is the live stream from the heavenly temple. This is Facebook Live in YouTube. This is the original Zoom, Revelation 1:12. I turned to see who was speaking to me. When I turned, I saw 7 oil lamps burning on top of the 7 gold stands. In the middle of the lampstands, I saw someone who looked like the human one. He wore a robe that stretched down to his feet, and he had a gold sash around his chest. His head and hair were white as white wool, like snow, and his eyes were like fiery flame. His feet were like fine brass that had been purified in a furnace. His voice sounded like rushing water. He held 7 stars in his right hand, and from his mouth came a sharp two-edged sword. His appearance was like the sun shining with all its power. This is the description of a judge who became the defender, who took our sentences upon himself and who brought the glory back to us. And the whole universe is transformed into the place of reverence. And we realize that the judge is someone who not only takes care of our past, replacing our filthy rags with the new clothes, not only present, realizing and placing us in the midst of the world, realizing who is in charge and how this kingdom can be actually lived out, how we can experience fully the joy and excitement of life, because we know and we see something more. We understand something more. We see something more in each other because we have this grace that covers us. You and I in the same courtroom. The past, the present, but also the future that the book of Revelation talks about. Brand new clothes, looking funny with the turbans on. Talking about the time for the selfie. What is the most amazing? We're not afraid of the judge. Because the judge is from the same hometown, from the same place, from the same church that you are. We no longer have to hold our breath. But I hear us breathing. And as we continue to live, I hear us breathing. Breathing grace. Breathe out grace. That's the place that became the courtroom, that the change, the past, the present, and the future. Breathe in grace. Breathe out grace. That is Zechariah. Amen.